Prismata is a fast-paced, easy-to-learn strategy game that was designed by mixing together several ideas from many different types of card games and strategy games. If you're into card games like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, you can imagine Prismata to be a similar game with one huge change. There are no decks, and instead, you get units onto the battlefield by developing technologies and spending resources. If you played a real-time strategy game like StarCraft, Prismata feels a bit like a fast, turn-based version with no map and no fog of war. In Prismata, players take turns spending their resources, building up their economies, deciding which technologies to invest in, constructing an army, and obliterating one another by trading volleys of attacks back and forth. To win, you have to destroy all of your opponent's units and remain the last side standing. So this is what the game screen in Prismata looks like at the start of the game. Each player starts with a few basic workers, drones, and engineers. The player who goes second starts with an extra drone. You can click or swipe your drones to produce resources, and on the left, you'll see all the different types of units that you can purchase using those resources, including attackers, defenders, economic units, and various types of technologies. Purchasing units consumes your resources, and these two drones that I just purchased will be available to work for me starting on my next turn. The 11 units that you see over here form what we call the Prismata base set, a basic set of 11 units that's available in every single game of Prismata. You'll notice that there's also a second tab of units available for purchase. These units are randomly selected every game from a pool of dozens of different types of units. So each game is different, and you have to plan your strategy depending on what's available. You can press Tab to switch between the two pages of units. Your opponent gets access to the same random units that you do, so you might want to be careful about, say, massing a lot of drones if your opponent could quickly mow you down with aggressive, rushy attackers. On the other hand, if a lot of highly defensive units are available, you might be able to go for a huge economy or tech up to an ultra-powerful high-tech unit. Every time you play, there are new units to construct, new build orders to plan and discover, and new threats to respond to. Down here, you'll see my pool of resources. There are 5 different types of resources in Prismata. Gold, which is produced when drones are clicked, is the most important resource in Prismata because it's required for pretty much every unit in the game. You generally want to make sure you get lots of drones so that you produce enough gold to be able to afford everything. Energy is the next resource. Energy is required to construct economic units like drones, and it's also used to power certain other types of unit abilities. Energy is produced automatically at the start of every turn by your engineers, which double as early defenders that can protect your drones. The remaining 3 resources, green, blue, and red, are produced by the Conduit, Blast Forge, and Animus, and these represent the 3 different types of tech you can invest in. Green, or Gaussite, is a powerful photonic crystal that unlocks super advanced cybernetic technologies. Blue, or Bohemium, is a durable alloy that can be used to build robust mechatronic units and tough defensive structures. Red, or Replicase, is a bioengineered nanosubstance that can be used to rapidly fabricate deadly bioweapons. The resources that you choose to obtain will ultimately depend on which types of units you want to get, what your opponent does, and how you react. You'll often choose to go for a different branch of tech than your opponent. Once you see that your opponent has slapped down a Conduit, you may decide that an Animus is the best response. The different resources also have different gameplay properties, the most important being that green and gold resources can be stored and used during a later turn, whereas energy, blue, and red resources decay at the end of your turn if you don't use them up. Combat in Prismata is pretty simple. On your turn, you can click your attackers to gain attack power, which is stored in this pool over here. Some units, like these Gauss cannons, produce attack power automatically and don't need to be clicked. At the end of your turn, your volley of attack is fired over to your opponent, who must defend against it before beginning their own turn. When defending, you'll see your opponent's attack power appear on the top half of the screen. Blue-colored units with a shield in the corner, like these engineers, this wall, and this rhino, are defenders. They can soak up damage to protect your other units. When defending, you have to click your defenders in order to absorb the damage from my opponent's volley of attack. Units that take lethal damage, like this Rhino and this Engineer, will die after I confirm my defense phase, whereas units like this Wall, that have only taken partial damage, can survive unscathed because they heal up after defense is over. The order that you defend in can matter a lot, as it influences which defenders live and which ones die. A big part of Prismata's tactics concern which units you choose to defend with and how you defend. There's one other case that needs to be mentioned. If your opponent doesn't have enough defenders to handle all of your attack power, then at the end of your turn, you wipe out all of your opponent's defenders and enter a special breach mode. When breaching, you can damage any of your opponent's units that you want using your leftover attack power. Getting breached is usually bad, so it's important to make sure your defenses are keeping up with your opponent's attacks. One interesting property of combat in Prismata is that units don't take any damage when they themselves attack. This means that in most games, both sides accumulate an increasingly large pile of attackers and the pressure builds. Defense works really well in the early game, but becomes increasingly expensive to maintain as the army sizes grow. Eventually, one player or the other is no longer able to keep up, and their opponent will be able to breach. Drones often get slaughtered first when breaching, and games frequently finish with the two armies of attackers fighting down to the last man.